"Is this some kind of joke?" asked the young officer as she stepped out of the patrol car with a mocking look. James Harris, 82 years old, remained still on his motorcycle, hands steady on the handlebars, his calm eyes fixed on the horizon. The officers exchanged impatient glances. "License and registration, and get off the bike now, sir." Her voice was firm. She wore mirrored sunglasses, one hand already resting on her holstered weapon. What they didn't know was that, in just a few minutes, 50 soldiers led by a captain would arrive in Humvees, looking for whoever had dared to stop James Harris. James Harris has been waking up at 5 in the morning every day for the past 40 years. Discipline still runs through his veins. His small farm sits about 10 miles outside of town. Yesterday, his 1978 John Deere tractor broke down, apart from the hydraulic system. Harris knows exactly which part it is. 42 years of fixing machines teaches a man to recognize every bolt, every gear. In the old rusty garage, Harris keeps a 1970 Harley-Davidson shovelhead. The engine roars like thunder. He doesn't care about appearances. The bike works. It gets him where he needs to go. That's enough. At 82, he rides better than most men in their 20s. Reflexes sharpened by decades of military training, always aware of his surroundings. A situational awareness that never left him. But of course, no one sees that when all they notice is an old man on an old bike. Life's irony is cruel. Those with the most to teach are often the ones who look like they have nothing to say. The traffic light turned red at the entrance to town. Harris stopped the Harley beside the gas station where he usually filled up. The engine kept rumbling, a deep, steady sound that echoed between houses and storefronts. That low roar of the old 1970 Harley shovelhead fell silent the moment he saw flashing police lights in his rearview mirror. Officer Ava Johnson walked toward the bike with long, confident strides. Mirrored sunglasses, 28 years old. 3 years on the city patrol. "Is this a joke?" she said with a mocking tone as she stepped out of the cruiser. "Sir, shut off that junk right now." Harris didn't move, still sitting on the bike, hands steady on the handlebars, eyes calm, locked on the horizon. The officers exchanged impatient looks. "License and registration, and step off the motorcycle, now." Johnson's voice was firm, one hand already resting on her weapon. He handed over the documents without rushing, everything neatly organized inside a worn-out brown leather wallet. Johnson looked at the license with suspicion. 82 years old? Don't you think you're a little too old to be riding a motorcycle? Officer David Lopez walked up, grinning. He looked the bike over from top to bottom. "Man, this Harley's older than my dad. Look at all that rust." "Hands on the bike, sir. Feet apart," Johnson ordered. The search was unnecessary and they both knew it, but they did it anyway. A small crowd began to form. Murmurs filled the air. "Mr. Harris, where do you live?" "On a farm nearby, right off Highway 340. "Alone?" "Alone." Johnson exchanged a glance with Lopez. It said, "Another confused old man. Do you have family? Anyone who takes care of you?" "I've been taking care of myself for 82 years. "Yes, but don't you think it's dangerous to ride that motorcycle at your age? You could cause an accident, hurt someone." Harris stayed silent, his eyes fixed on the horizon, hands clasped behind his back. "Sir, I'm talking to you." "I'm listening." "Then answer me. Don't you think it's irresponsible to ride an old bike like that at your age?" Lopez leaned in and whispered to Johnson, "I think he might be a little deaf too. Look at him, just standing there, barely responding." Johnson raised her voice. "Mr. Harris, can you hear me? Do you understand what I'm saying?" The crowd grew. So did the voices. Poor old man. Don't these cops have better things to do? He does look kinda confused. Somebody should call his family. The world split, as it always does, between compassion and judgment, especially when we don't know someone's story. Harris remained silent. He closed his eyes for a few seconds, took a deep breath. He had faced far worse situations than this, in places far more dangerous, with consequences far more serious. But that was over 50 years ago. Now he was just another old man, being humiliated in public. Across the street at the gas station, the owner Marcus stopped wiping down the fuel pump. A Gulf War veteran, 58 years old, he recognized James Harris immediately. Harris had been filling up at that station for 15 years, always polite, always on time with his payments, always with a kind word for Marcus. Marcus saw the humiliation unfolding and felt his blood boil. He grabbed the phone and dialed the nearby military base at Fort Carson. "Hello, this is Marcus Williams. I need to speak with an officer on duty. It's urgent." Back across the street, things were getting worse. Officer Johnson was now raising her voice, clearly irritated by Harris's silence. "Sir, you're going to have to come with us to the station." Harris finally spoke, his voice calm and low. "And what for?" "For inappropriate behavior and failure to properly respond to a law enforcement officer." She paused, then added, "Also, you need a medical evaluation before even thinking about riding that motorcycle again." Harris looked at her with the same patience he'd once used to train hundreds of young soldiers. The same kind of patience he'd shown 18-year-old recruits who arrived at boot camp thinking they already knew everything about life. "Ava, let me try," said Lopez. "Mr. Harris, you understand our concern, right? A man your age, riding a bike like that, it could be dangerous." "For who?" "For you, for other drivers. I've been riding for 65 years, I've never caused an accident." "Yeah, but now it's different. Slower reflexes, impaired vision." Harris could have explained that his reflexes were tested 6 months ago during his annual medical check, that he exercises every day, that his coordination is better than most younger men's. He could have said all that, but he didn't need to prove anything to anyone. On the phone with the base, Marcus explained the situation. "We've got a fellow veteran being disrespected by local police, James Harris, 82 years old. I've known him for 15 years. He's an honest man being humiliated in public just for riding his bike." The officer on the other end of the line suddenly changed his tone. "Did you say James Harris? Hold on a second." A moment later, "Mr. Williams, keep your eyes on the situation. We're sending a unit right now. Do not let them do anything to Colonel Harris until we arrive." "Colonel, I can't give you details over the phone, but we'll be there in 15 minutes. The call ended. Marcus stepped closer to the road, his heart pounding. "Colonel." James had never mentioned his military rank. Across the street, the situation reached a whole new level of absurdity. Officer Johnson had now decided Harris needed to be taken in for a psychiatric evaluation. "Mr. Harris, I'm going to need you to get in the vehicle. We're going to the hospital for an evaluation." "I'm not going." "What do you mean you're not going? This isn't a request, it's an order." "Based on what law?" Johnson hesitated. "There's no law that allows someone to detain an elderly man just for riding an old motorcycle. No regulation that mandates a psych evaluation without reasonable cause." But now she was in too deep. People were filming. Backing down would mean admitting poor judgment. Elder protection law, behavior that puts his own safety at risk. Harris smiled for the first time. A small, almost invisible smile. The kind that comes from recognizing a well-crafted lie. He'd heard much more elaborate lies, from enemies far more dangerous. "Officer Johnson, may I ask you a question? How many years have you been in service?" Johnson didn't like the tone. Or the question. "Mr. Harris, get in the vehicle now." "I'm not going." "Then I'll have to use force." Marcus, still watching from across the street, felt something stir inside him. Admiration. Whoever James Harris really was, the man had unbelievable courage. The crowd felt the tension rise. They knew something important was about to happen, and they were right. Far down the road, several vehicles began approaching fast. James Harris had no idea, but help was on the way. The sound came first, a deep roar of engines. 12 Humvees speeding around the bend, kicking up dust as they approached. The vehicles came to a halt in a semicircle around the scene. 50 soldiers stepped out of the Humvees. From the lead vehicle, an Army officer emerged. Captain George Farrell, 55 years old, 22 years of active service. He walked straight toward James Harris, completely ignoring the local officers. He stopped 3 meters away and snapped a salute. "Colonel Harris!" The word colonel hit the air like a grenade. Johnson and Lopez exchanged panicked glances. "Sir, we were informed there was some sort of misunderstanding here." Farrell turned to the officers for the first time, his eyes cut like a blade. Who dared to stop Colonel Harris? Johnson tried to recover control. "Officer Johnson, local police, we stopped this gentleman because—" "This gentleman?" Farrell's voice rose. All 50 soldiers took a synchronized step forward, an instinctive show of support for their commander. "Captain, I didn't know he was military. This man served 3 tours in Vietnam, carried out intelligence operations in the Gulf and Afghanistan, personally trained hundreds of U.S. Army officers, including myself. This man you stopped, he holds 2 bronze stars, 2 Purple Hearts with 4 oak leaf clusters, and a Distinguished Service Cross. Colonel Harris is considered a living legend in the United States Armed Forces. Soldiers from all over the country came to train under him." Farrell turned back to Johnson. "Officer, you disrespected a decorated war hero who gave 60 years of his life in service to your country." Lopez tried to step in. "We were just doing our job. Your job is to protect and serve, not to humiliate an old man in public." The shift in the crowd was immediate. Cell phones were still recording, but now with reverence, not ridicule. The comments had completely changed. "Poor guy. That was awful. That officer really crossed the line." Johnson stepped closer to Harris. "Sir, Colonel Harris, I'm sorry, I didn't know. Officer Johnson, may I offer you some advice?" "Yes, sir. Never judge someone by their appearance. You have no idea what battles they fought, what scars they carry inside." The lesson echoed, not just for Johnson, but for everyone watching and filming. Farrell approached. "Colonel, is there anything you need? An escort? Transportation?" "No, Captain, but thank you for coming." "Sir, we'll always be here. Always." Harris walked back to his Harley, started the engine. The 50 soldiers stood in formation, creating a corridor of honor as he rode away. 1 hour later, at the local police station, Sheriff Smith, 52 years old, 15 years in office, receives a call from the military base. "Sheriff Smith, Captain Farrell, Fort Carson. We need to talk about the incident this morning." "Captain, I'm already aware. I've spoken with Officers Johnson and Lopez. And what will be the procedure?" Smith hesitated. He'd known Ava Johnson for 5 years. A good officer. Dedicated. "Captain, may I be frank?" "Please." "My officers made a mistake in judgment. Not a crime. Sheriff, let me be clear. Colonel Harris doesn't want revenge. He's not suing anyone. He doesn't want to ruin anyone's career. But we, as a military institution, cannot accept our veterans being treated this way." Smith understood the message. Political weight, institutional pressure, consequences that went far beyond a local precinct. "What do you suggest?" "A training program, developed in partnership with us. Your officers will visit our base to understand what it truly means to serve this country." "It'll be done, Captain." 1 week later, at the municipal precinct, Sheriff Smith gathered all the officers for an emergency meeting. "Everyone, starting today, we're implementing a new protocol for field encounters, and all of you will be attending training at the military base." Ava Johnson stood up, nervous. "Colleagues, last week I made a serious mistake. I disrespected a man who deserves our deepest admiration. But I learned something more important than procedures and regulations. I learned about human dignity." She looked around at her fellow officers. "Every person we stop on the street carries a story. This is about treating everyone, especially the elderly, with basic respect. Asking before assuming, listening before judging." Days later, Officer Ava Johnson drove down Highway 340, heart pounding. The property was simple but well kept. A white-painted wooden house, a porch with rocking chairs, a garden full of colorful flowers, a John Deere tractor parked next to the barn. Harris was underneath the tractor, in a grease-stained coverall, working on the hydraulic system. His Harley rested in the shade of a large tree. Johnson pulled up in the patrol car, took a deep breath, walked over to where Harris was working. "Colonel Harris?" Harris slid out from under the tractor, wiped his hands on an old rag. "Officer Johnson, can I help you?" "Sir, I came to talk, if that's all right with you. Want some coffee? Just made a fresh pot." Inside the modest kitchen, Harris poured coffee into 2 blue ceramic mugs. He sat at an old wooden table and motioned for Johnson to sit across from him. "Officer, may I ask you a few questions?" "Of course. Why did you become a police officer?" Johnson wasn't expecting that. "I wanted to help people, make a difference in the community." "How many accidents caused by elderly drivers have you responded to?" "Very few, actually. Most of the accidents I see are caused by younger drivers. Drunk, speeding, texting." Harris gave a gentle smile. "Then why did you assume I was the problem?" Johnson couldn't answer. The truth was too obvious, and too painful. Harris stood and walked to the window. He watched his cows grazing in the pasture. Respect isn't earned just by a uniform or a rank. It's earned by how you treat others, no matter their age. She looked out the window, at the motorcycle. She realized Harris had been riding that bike longer than she'd been alive. That 1970 Harley Davidson still made noise, still looked old and rusty, but it still worked. It still got Harris where he needed to go. That motorcycle still had roads to travel. So did Colonel Harris. So do all of us. If you enjoyed this story, click the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next.